Jumping back in with some Icewind Dale character review. In this vlog, we're going to explore the Jester. Now, I find this bard class to be kind of interesting in that bards, generally speaking, you can build them out to be active or passive. If we're playing a game like Baldur's Gate that shares a similar engine, the primary tune is really where you have the choice of what character class you want to play. So you have to kind of give careful consideration of what do I feel like going through the game as? Because for the most part, I'm limited to those NPCs. If I pick a character class that's not available as an NPC, that's what I'm going to be locked into. Yes, I know you can do the multiplayer, single player, and import your own characters and play them in Baldur's Gate, but we're kind of putting aside that experience because Baldur's Gate, I find, with the NPCs, the storyline, the dialogue, the romances, the involvement, I kind of want to play those. I don't want to have just my party. But Icewind Dale being about saving the Dale and really kind of combat-focused AD&D, having that agency and control over your party is more important. So the Jester being a bit more passive in playstyle, that's okay because you're going to have some other party members. Now, focusing in on the Bard. The Bard's a little bit of everything in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Not so much, and I'm just using it for context, as Neverwinter Nights, where you can build out certain skills and you can select from specific Bard spells, as opposed to Icewind Dale, which utilizes kind of the AD&D magic user arcane spell list. But from that perspective, even in Icewind Dale, the Bard has a little bit of magic. You can utilize some gear. You've got some lore. You're going to save yourself a little bit of gold on identifying. And that's, on a side note, that's useful. Not so much in the case of saving gold, although I always want to save gold because there's some good items to purchase, especially where I kind of know what the item is based on what it looks like, but I can't sell it until it's identified. I mean, I could pop off scrolls or memorizations, but that's kind of annoying to have to switch and rest. But mainly it's nice to have because if you're in the middle of, no spoilers, some of the different quests and areas, it's nice to be able to lore, identify, and then immediately equip and utilize it, especially when the graphic of the item looks really cool. And you're like, okay, this is something good. We got to see what's going on. But the main thing of the Bard, of course, in AD&D rule set is Bard Song, being able to influence the party and stack those aspects. Now, the Bard in Icewind Dale and how that rolls out, the Bard Song, it's even more augmented. This is a passive type character, meaning combat begins and there's a lot of combat. You pop off Bard Song and you kind of hang out, not in the middle of things, but a little bit behind to blast that radius and buff all of your characters. Second to that, I'm really not going to engage in combat because a Bard is not a frontline fighter. It's not a second-line fighter. That's not to say some of the Bard kits aren't a little more aggressive. But for the most part, I also want to utilize some spells. So I'm not going to be utilizing certain select suits of armor, which means my armor class is going to be real high. Even with dex, even with bonuses, even with rings and other type of things to protect, it never really gets low enough. And you can get away with that in BG, but you can't get away with that in the Dale because it's throwing lots and lots of monsters at you. And we need to also explore why armor class is important in this game and not necessarily in other games, although armor class is never a bad thing to have in AD&D. So from that perspective, you buff your party. Now, the Jester is really interesting and a little bit limiting in a good way. The Bard Song is inverted. Essentially, it has the potential to cause mass confusion that gets better as you level up. It's a auto-on, power-on-demand confusion spell. Confusion's kind of interesting in that it makes the affected target do random types of things. So normally in AD&D, confusion spells and confusion, it's okay. There's a lot of what ifs, meaning first I got to pop the spell off. I got to pop the ability off. This is similar to charms and dominates, right? First I have to make it happen. Well, do I have it memorized? If I do, it's potentially taking up a slot from another type of memorization or if it's an object that takes up a clicky, that's gold resources, that's charges, do I have it in the first place? It's consumable in some way, whether it's renewable or not. Second to that, I cast it. Well, first I've got to beat the saving throw. Then there's a duration. And for the most part, it's 1-to-1. It's a limited effect. Jester just blasts through all of that. It's always on. It's a radius. It's a constant effect. And given that Icewind Dale is more of a mass combat type game where it throws a lot of stuff at you, this is just D&D science of rolling dice. I mean, take out, if you play tabletop D&D, I know you've got a bag of like 70 or 80 D20s because you never stop buying dice. I'm like years in and it's like, oh, I need more dice. Like I just get seduced by dice, and it's not even a wargaming thing. It's a D&D thing. So from that perspective, just roll a bunch of D20s and just be like, if I get 12 or less, it's a fail. Or 15 or less, it's a fail. You're going to see things come up. And if that's a constant roll throughout the rounds, that means when you play the Jester, stuff is always failing. Now, of course, without giving away any spoilers, there's a lot of different settings in Icewind Dale. So it's not going to work on undead. It's not going to work on constructs. But there's more than enough in the game to be blasting and working it out. Now, what this means is you're going to be regularly using this. So your second fallback as a bard is magic. Chromatic orb, magic missile, other things. You don't gain spells as fast. You don't have as many possible casts. But you've got a nice little second line arcane caster that's going to blast stuff out, whether you have a primary mage or sorcerer or you've decided to kind of go more of a stacking druid run, although you should probably always have a druid in your party. Lots of ways to play Icewind Dale, but it's nice to have that. So for the most part, I find with the Jester, I'm not utilizing the magics. I'm utilizing the song. I'm buffing with the song. If that doesn't work, then I switch to magic. Or in some, I have to be careful not to give anything away. It's kind of the classic Dale D&D/BG encounter where you've got some trash mobs, you've got some stuff you have to chew through, and there's a caster at the other end. So that caster at the other end, they're going to start doing little animations and start casting the spells. You can hear it. You got to hit them. Maybe you've got a ranged character. Your magic user in the party, of course, is going to blast. The bard, the Jester, I'll switch to magic at that point. I won't lead specific with song. It's like all eyes on that caster. Drop it with a couple of casts. Bard works great at throwing a little magic. And then third, we will draw steel and go into combat because I need to utilize that. So I find that for the lulls, playing it, that occupies a character slot to be utilizing that song. It works just on volume of dice and rerolls. But switching then to arcane, switching then to steel. From that perspective, it is pretty straightforward because the bard song is utilized for that. But you would be surprised. I mean, I would challenge you to play a Jester in your next playthrough. But even if you just want to run, if you've been through Icewind Dale a few times and you want to run just kind of that first chapter without giving anything away, where you're fighting some monsters that are affected by it, some light mobs, you'll be amazed how they fail, they wander off, they just stand there, they do nothing, they run away. Interesting stuff and how it affects.